In Lesson 1-6, we are going to learn how to solve number stories. So on your whiteboard, as always, you are going to number 1 to 3. Today, I just want you to think about estimating a sum for these two numbers. So for example, on my board, I would write 27 is closest to 30, 59 is closest to 60, 30 plus 60 is 90. Would you try that for the next two? Go ahead and pause the video. For number 2, 52 is closest to 50, 45 is closer to 50, and 50 plus 50 is 100. Number 3, 88 is closest to 90, 36 is closest to 40, 9 and 4 is 13, it's 130. Go ahead and wipe off your whiteboard. Again, number 1 to 3. This time, round to the largest place value. That might be the tens or it might be the hundreds. Go ahead, round to the nearest place value in each and add. Go ahead and pause the video. So 124 is closest to 100. 59 is closest to 60. A quick estimation would be of 160. 75, it's 5 next to our tens place, so 5 or more, raise the score, 80. And 212 is closer to 200 than it is 300. So estimating, 280. Number 3, 44 is closer to 40. 448, remember the rule, 4 or less, let it rest. So a quick estimation would be 440. Go ahead and erase your whiteboard and one more warm-up set of problems. Again, please round to the largest place value. So if I'm looking at the very first one, I'm going to round 667 to the nearest hundred. So remember, you're going to circle the number in the hundreds place. Look, run 1 to the right, 5 or more, raise the score. It's 5 or more, so it'll raise to a 7, and the numbers after the hundreds turns to a 0. So we worked on this for a couple of days last week. 309 is closest to 300. So our estimation for that addition problem is 1,000. 539 is closer to 500. 278 is closest to 300. Remember, do this with me on your whiteboard. Make corrections if needed. For number 3, we're going to round to the nearest 1,000. 5 or more, raise the score. Same thing. Again, we're just looking for an answer that is close to the actual answer. Go ahead and wipe off your whiteboard. You are going to move on to journal page 13. The world's tallest buildings. Number 1, Terrell is a competitive stair climber. He competes by climbing stairs as fast as he can. This year, he wants to climb 400 stories. The Burj Khalifa in the United Arab Emirates is the world's tallest building with 163 stories. The Petronas Tower, the tallest building in Malaysia, has 88 stories. The Xifeng Tower in China has 89 stories. If Terrell climbs all 3 buildings, how many more stories will he need to climb to reach his goal of 400? So the first thing we're going to do is know that we're going to take 163, go ahead and circle that in your math journal. 89, circle that number. And 88. We know I'm going to put a box around 400, and I'm going to underline the question that it's asking. How many more stories will he need to complete or climb? So those are some key pieces of information. So if you're not in the habit of circling important key pieces of information or underlining what you're being asked, now would be a great time to start that. So 163, would you write that in your math journal? we're going to round that to the nearest 100. So it's 5 or more, so we're going to raise the score. Please write this as I do. 88, we're going to round to the nearest 10. 88 is closest to 90. Make sure you're lining those numbers up so you do not need to rewrite them. 89, we're going to round to the nearest 10. 5 or more, raise the score. So go ahead and add those three numbers together. Now, what I'm going to do is try to figure out how many more stories will he need to climb. If we're figuring out how many more, what we're doing is we're actually figuring out difference. So in order to figure out the difference, I'm going to subtract. So these problem stories are multiple steps. So we had to estimate first, number 1. Number 2, we had to add. And now number 3, we're going to subtract. So he wants to climb 400 stories. Write this in your math journal. We're going to subtract 380 from it. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract. I get a difference of 20 stories that he still needs to climb. Now what we need to do is we need to figure out the actual answer with a number model. So I'm going to go ahead and skip down to the very bottom where it says number model. We know that he needs to climb 400 stories to meet his goal. We know we can subtract what he's already climbed. So I'm going to actually add all of those three numbers up together. So I'm going to take the 163 plus 88 plus 89 to get what we need to figure out, which is the actual answer. You may choose to add up 163, 88, and 89 on a whiteboard off to the side. So on your whiteboard, I just erased my working place, but imagine I was going to do this on my whiteboard. I would take 163 plus 88 plus 89, what I did here in the parentheses. I'm going to add those all up together. Would you please go ahead and pause the video, add those three numbers up. So 3 plus 8 is 11, plus 9 is 20. Carry my 2. 2 plus 6 is 8. 8 plus 8 plus 8 is 24. Carry your 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. We're not done yet. Remember, he wants to climb 400 stairs. We know he's climbed exactly 340. So we're going to go ahead and subtract. He needs to climb 60 more stories. Let's continue. Number 2, estimate, then solve. Terrell climbed 4 buildings in the United States. In Chicago, he climbed the Willis Tower, 108 stories. Circle that. And the John Hancock Tower, 100 stories. Circle that. In New York City, he climbed the Empire State Building, 102 stories. Circle that. And the Bank of America Tower, 54 stories. How many stories did he climb in all? In all means you're going to add those numbers together. So the first thing we want to do is estimate. So 108, use the white places around number 2 to use as a working area or use your whiteboard. So I'm going to estimate the Willis Tower. 108, closest to 100. 100 for the John Hancock. I can go ahead and just write that down. Empire State Building, closest to 100. 54. Let's round to the 10, 4 or less. Let it rest. Then we're going to figure in all, how many stories has he climbed in the United States? Add that all up. Pause the video if needed. He's climbed 350 stories. Then I'm going to skip the actual answer and go ahead and add together using the number model. I'm just going to list the stories. Willis Tower, 108. Fill this out with me. John Hancock Center, 100 stories. 102 for the Empire State Building, and 54 for the Bank of America Tower. Now what we need to do is go ahead and add those numbers. So maybe use your whiteboard or another white space in your math journal. You're going to rewrite all of those numbers in a column. You're going to make sure that you line up your numbers. Go ahead and pause the video and add those. 8 plus 2 is 10, plus 4 is 14. 1 plus 5 is 6. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 364 stories. Does my answer make sense? Yes, because 364 is close to 350. Remember, if you need more time to pause the video. Number 3, estimate, then solve. Terrell climbed 4 buildings for a total of 472 stories. He climbed the Burj Khalifa, 163 stories. The Burj Al Bait in Saudi Arabia, 120 stories. The Taipei 101 in Taiwan, 101 stories, and another tall building. How many stories tall is the last building he climbed? So again, we're going to go ahead and estimate. Do this with me in your math journal or estimate on your whiteboard. 163. 5 or more, raise the score closer to 200. 120, closest to 100. 4 or less, let it rest. 101, closest to 100. Now, what we're going to have to do is to figure out what that third building is. Let's go ahead and add those together. Approximately 400 stories for those 3 buildings. Now what we're going to do is take the total amount of stories that he climbed and figure out what the difference between those 3 buildings and the one that we're unsure of. So let's round 472 to the nearest 100. 5 or more, raise the score. So about 500 stories he climbed in all 4 buildings. We know the 3 buildings equaled 400. What we're doing is figuring out the difference between those 3 and the complete 4 that he is accounting for. So if we subtract, we know that that 4th building needs to be about 100 stories. Again, make sure you are completing this in your math journal with me. We're going to go ahead and write a number story. We know that 472 stories is what he climbed, and we're going to subtract the 3 buildings that we know. Let's add those together like we did over here, but we'll do the actual stories rather than an estimation. So now on your whiteboard, go ahead and add together 163, 120, and 101. Stop your video and go ahead and add. 3 plus 1 is 4, 6 plus 2 is 8, and 1 is 3. But we're not there yet. On your whiteboard, we're going to have to take the number of stories that he climbed in all 4 buildings, subtract the amount we know for the 3 buildings, and we'll now know what that missing building is. So remember, I cannot take 2 minus 4, so I'm going to borrow from the 7 and make it 6. Now I add that 10 to the 2 to get 12. Now I can subtract. 12 minus 4 is 8. I cannot subtract 8 from 6. I'm going to borrow from the hundreds, put that in front of the 1 to get 16 minus 8 is 8. He needs to climb 88 stories in that 4th building. That's how tall the last building is. So does our answer make sense? Well, is 88 closest to 100? Yes. And the reason being is 88 is close to my estimate of 100. Now what you're going to do is you are going to go ahead and work on IXL. You do not need to worry about number 4 and number 5 on the next journal page unless you'd like to give it a try.